Welcome, and thank you for joining this session of Innovation Institute 2021. With nearly 50 sessions available through the summer, we know you'll be discovering new skills, strategies, and resources to transform the teaching and learning in your classroom, and we would love to hear from you. If you haven't already done so, please be sure to visit the Town Hall in Attendify to connect with the attendees through the activity stream or community features. If you would like a certificate of attendance for attending this session, you will find the request form linked at the end of the session description in Attendify. Thank you, and enjoy this session from one of our amazing Innovation Institute presenters.
All right, so tonight we're going to be talking about how to turn any unit into a project-based learning experience. And really, as a school leader, I'm going to be talking to you from the perspective of what this looks like from coaching, from being a principal, from being a curriculum specialist, from being a technology director, from being a superintendent, any of those different types of roles. And really, not just what it looks like to grow project-based learning, but also what it looks like to break out of the pockets of individual teachers doing it, right? How can we expand this work in the classroom? And so just a couple things before we begin. Number one, everybody's on mute today. There's a lot of people on the webinar right now. There is definitely no magic bullets, right? So even though we're going to be covering this 5-step process that I've used in the classroom, K through 12, and that I've also used as a school leader, thanks for that, Rob. Appreciate it. There is no magic bullets, right? It takes work. This kind of move to project-based learning takes work. I'm a firm believer that this webinar, this workshop here, will change the way you look at project-based learning and planning authentic tasks. And then at the end, I have a really cool opportunity for you, something I'm pretty excited to share out with everybody. And please share questions in the chat throughout the entire workshop. Use that chat as a way for you to share questions, have conversations on the side with different type of people. I may not be answering all of your questions as they're coming in, but I'm going to see them and be able to address them at least towards the end. The other thing is I've done this webinar a couple of different times, and if the slide sticks, if you feel like I'm moving on but the slide's not moving along with me, please let me know in the chat, because then I can just reset the slide. That's happened a couple times in some of the workshops that we've done. Technology is never perfect, right? It's never perfect. So I'm AJ Giuliani. I am an author of multiple books around project-based learning and student ownership and inquiry in the classroom. A couple of them co-authored with John Spencer, a couple by my own, and just really am a believer in project-based learning and what it does for kids and entire schools and what that looks like. I've been lucky to start my teaching career as a middle school, junior high English language arts teacher, and then I moved up to being a high school English teacher and taught everything from grade 6 through 12, and then I moved down to being a K through 5 instructional coach. And I spent a lot of time learning what it was like to actually teach at an elementary level. And then I moved into being a K through 12 technology staff developer, and then I joined the dark side, as my teachers used to tell me. I joined administration, right? And I've had many different roles in administration: curriculum, technology, director of learning and innovation, and have really implemented in the past 3 school districts I've been in project-based learning K through 12 across the board. And I'm going to share some of the things I've learned in that process. I also work at the University of Pennsylvania as somebody who works for a graduate school of education, working with teachers in graduate school classes, and a professor and faculty in that role as well. And it's pretty interesting. But I would say my biggest role is that of a dad, right? So these are my 4 kids, and it's so exciting to kind of see them grow and go to school. And it's changed my perspective on everything. Yeah, Rob, I'm going to send the recording and the slides at the end of this webinar. You get the whole recording and the slides. So as a dad, my perspective on education has changed a lot. I have 4 different kids here, 3 that are going to be in elementary school, grade 5, grade 2, and kindergarten. And it is going to be really interesting to see them continue to grow through the educational system. And I see that all four of my kids are different learners. My oldest, Kylie, she loves school. She's so excited. She wants to be challenged. She wants to really dive into kind of learning. My son Tucker there on the right, he's the one that's just a menace, right? He's all over the place. He's into things. He can't sit still. He has an IEP, and we always think about how is he going to get labeled in school, right? And how is he going to label himself? And he needs different types of supports than my oldest child does. And my son Mason right there in the bow tie, he loves sports. And I see him going into school and really caring about those extracurriculars. Now my youngest, well, we used to say that she's bossy, but now we say that she has CEO qualities. And let's just say I'm interested to see what she's going to be like in school. But my why that's driving me in this work and that has me so focused on project-based learning is this fact, that every student in our schools is someone else's whole world. And when I send my 4 kids to school, I know that they all learn in 4 different ways. What does that look like when you have classrooms full of kids from all different families, households, backgrounds, all different types of things? What does that look like to be a teacher, to be a school leader, and where all learn in different ways? And we know that things are changing as well, right? We know that their future has never been more unknown. We're not sure what college and career are going to look like. We know that 70% of entry-level jobs are being replaced by automation. And when we look at what the Fortune 500 CEOs and the small business owners, this is what they're looking for in their future employees. They want kids that can work in a team, that have problem-solving skills, communication skills, leadership, initiative, flexibility, adaptability. This is what they're looking for. And, I believe that these textbooks, traditional teaching methods, and standardized tests really don't allow kids to engage in any of these skills. And project-based learning allows them to not just get used to what it looks like to work in a team and have communication skills and have leadership opportunities, but also struggle with them and be challenged by them and learn from those roles. As a school leader, I've seen that one of the big issues is our students are dropping in engagement K through 12. And so it's very interesting to see that each year kids are in school, their level of engagement drops. And in the midst of all this, I think a lot of people would say, oh man, we need to change everything. We need to change everything we're doing in school. We need to reform everything. I've heard people that I'm friends with, people that I really respect say that. I actually think kind of the opposite. I think we actually need to focus on what doesn't change in education, but just what it looks like in 2019, 2020, 2021, and beyond. The principles of learning and engagement are still the same. If Socrates wanted to create an engaged learning experience, if it was social, human, meaning-centered, language-based, it would be an engaged learning experience for his pupils. The same thing if your teachers tomorrow wanted to create an engaged learning experience for their students, if it was social, human, meaning-centered, language-based, it would be engaging for them. And so how can we create these type of learning experiences for our students on a daily basis? What does that look like, right? The big battle that we're facing in schools right now is this attention battle, right? The science of learning hasn't changed either. Our kids learn when they're paying attention, just like our staff, just like anybody. And for a long time, schools, myself as a teacher, the only way I got students to pay attention was through necessity. And we got a quiz tomorrow. We have a 100-point project, a 200-point project. I'm going to call your parents. We're sending home a report card, or there's bonus points or extra credit. It was all about necessity. And yet our kids are coming to school more and more with these phones in their pockets that are getting their attention through interest, through meaning, through relevance. And here we are as schools, and we have a decision to make. Are we going to keep trying to fight the attention battle with the necessity, or are we actually going to tap into students' interests? Are we going to make learning meaningful and relevant? And what is that going to look like? If I said, show of hands right now, how many people want more kids engaged in their schools? Probably everybody's hands would raise up. And this is what Phil Schlechte from the Schlechte Center of Engagement says engagement is. Engagement is high attention and high commitment. It is not compliance. A lot of times in schools, we're looking for compliance when we really should be looking for engagement. Kids are either strategically compliant or ritually compliant, and both are just because they're playing the game of school. When we look at what engagement is, that high attention and high commitment, it matches up exactly with what the science of learning is. That's what we're looking for. This happens to be 80% plus of our classrooms. Kids that are paying attention because they have quizzes and tests and things that they have to get done, but there's low commitment. If you took away those extrinsic goals, the students would not be compliant. And then ritual compliance is kids that are low attention, low commitment, but they're good kids. They're not creating any problems. They'll expend whatever effort is needed to avoid the negative consequences. But they're just compliant because that's what you're supposed to do in school. That's what it's going to look like. So the question I'm asking is, what happens if we start with what's best for this learner? What happens if we really engage and empower students? What does that look like in project-based learning? The engagement cycle is pretty simple. It starts with attention, and that attention can either come from interest or necessity. When it comes from interest, it starts to go into the commitment process, and this is commitment to learning more. It's commitment about the process, that even when things don't go right the first time, they're going to continue learning. That's when kids start asking for help, expanding their reach, going deeper for more information, and they start to demonstrate their understanding with failing expected. Engaging students means getting kids excited about our content, our interests, our curricula. That's part of our role as school leaders, is to make sure that the standards and curriculum and things that we have in place or the state has in place are followed. And the role of the teachers is to excite the kids for the ride, right? Get them excited for the learning journey. But the other goal of school is to empower students. And this means giving kids the knowledge and the skills to pursue their passions, their interests, their future. I think you said it was stuck. I'm going to pop it back on here. Empowering students is a little bit different than engaging. Empowering students is saying our job as educators is that these kids are not going to be in school forever. And we are going to give them the skills and knowledge to pursue their passions, their interests, their future, the things that they're excited about. This is having them excited for their own ride, right? This is excited for their own ride. And basically we do this for the process of giving choice. When you give choice in a subject, choice and voice to our students, then the kids can have some ownership. And when they have ownership, they have empowerment. And when they have empowerment, deeper learning can happen. But how do we do this? And this is the big thing as the school leaders. How do we do this without our teachers feeling like this? Without feeling like they have too many things going on, that they're just stuck, that they're not able to hit the standards and curriculum. And so that's what the 5 steps is all about. The 5 steps is all about how can we do project-based learning while still hitting the things that we have to as a teacher and what that looks like. So step 1 is not starting with the standards and curriculum. You may think that should be the first step, but really it's just starting with a reason for learning. If we agree that we're fighting this attention battle, the number one thing we have to focus on is how are we getting attention? And this is the reason. What is the reason for learning? What is the reason for project-based learning? When we start with a problem or a challenge or an inquiry, that get kids excited about learning. It could be a physical product, right? It could be kids creating a physical product, creating a prototype. I remember our grade 3 students that were creating a physical product to get more people recycling. They created a complete basketball hoop they put around a recycling bin to count up the points of every time kids recycled. It could be a digital product, right? It could be apps or games. We just had a group of kids that were creating Flappy Bird games and creating their own narrative and stories around those games. It could be a natural phenomenon. I remember when Hurricane Sandy hit the East Coast and we're out of power for 5 days. All of the kids were upset because they couldn't charge their cell phones. But there was one fifth grader who, for his science fair project, had created a solar-powered charging device. And people came from far and wide to charge their cell phones on his solar-powered charging device. When he came back to school, he was a hero. He was a legend. And the teachers wrote into their curriculum a solar-powered charging device project. It could come from awareness of an issue, something that kids are kind of interested in their community or school. It could come from geeky interest, something that they're really interested in. Think about Genius Hour or 20% or project-based learning or inquiry. It could come from those geeky interests. It could come from a problem solve. Maybe there's a specific problem to solve. I think about our high school students solving a problem about traffic on rain and snow days, where the traffic piled up because there was only one entrance into the school, and how they created a plan and proposed that plan to city council and talked about all the different types of things that were involved to solve that problem. Or reason to start project-based learning, putting yourself in the shoes of somebody else. I think about our students that did Project Global Inform. They were in my 10th grade class, and they were learning about human rights violations and injustice. And instead of just learning about them and researching and writing a paper, they actually created social media and multimedia awareness campaigns. First, they informed their school community about all of these human rights violations and genocide that were happening in the world right now. Then they shared it out to the community and then to the bigger country and world population. They went through this process and really had a reason for what the learning was. If step one is all about a reason for learning, right, then it goes into step two. And step two is, what are students going to learn? If students have a reason for learning, then the second step is really thinking about what knowledge and skills will they acquire and master? What is that going to look like? And so even in a project like my 20% time project, my Genius Hour project, where students were given 20% of their class time to create their own learning path, to learn what they're interested about. And they had a chance to create their own products and put their learning into action. They created Shark Tank pitches. And then they began to start learning and talking to real mentors and real people, and started sharing and writing and blogging and YouTube videos about their process and building and making their project into reality, and finally presenting what they made and the failures along the way. In this process, there were so many standards that they were hitting. They were learning how to research. They were hitting all these standards connecting to reading and researching. They were learning inquiry and text evidence. All these standards connected to inquiry, right? They were hitting standards connecting to writing and presenting and creating, right? And even in my language arts, my English class, they were hitting mathematical standards around constructing, critiquing, and modeling. They're hitting every single one of the National Education Technology Standards from ISTE, and they were definitely hitting those big 4 C's, right? They were hitting those big 4 C's that we like to call 21st century skills, but really, I'm pretty sure Aristotle was using them, and they have always been needed skills. When you look at the difference between project-based learning and traditional instruction, I just want you to look at this. Second from the bottom, the student role. The big difference is in traditional instruction, the student is the receiver of the information. And in PBL, they are the discoverer of information. It is a huge difference when students are discovering what is happening and learning through discovery versus learning from receiving from the teacher. This can happen all different types of ways. I think about a project that our students just did around how they're investigating light and shadows, right? They're creating paper cut lanterns, and there's this whole big project where they're looking at how do different materials affect the luminosity of a light bulb. Look at the standards they're hitting. They're hitting all these standards connected to English language arts, and they're hitting all these standards connected to math. And so once we have a reason for learning, then we can connect it to the standards in the curriculum and our scope and sequence. Step 3 then is, what will students make, create, and design, right? Who are they creating for and why? And so now we're actually thinking about critically, okay, they got a reason. We have chosen the standards and the part of the unit where they're going to be doing this. What are they going to make? What are they going to create, design? Who are they going to do it for? In elementary, this looks a little bit different. In grades K through 2, here's some of the projects that our students are doing. Things like a better playground project. In this project, students learn about geometry and create what a playground blueprint would be. And then they take that blueprint and they present it to their classmates, and they end up presenting it to other classes, and they end up presenting it to the principal, and they end up presenting it to the parent-teacher organization. They're learning so much, but they have a reason for learning, and it's connected to the standards and curriculum. In grades 3 through 5, one of my favorite projects that they're doing is the Selfie Rights Project. This coincides with our trip to the zoo, and the Selfie Rights Project is all about whether or not animals should have selfie rights for the pictures that humans take at the zoo of them with the animals. The kids are asking real questions to people at the zoo. They're talking to people that work there. They're formulating their opinion at research. They're creating a persuasive documentary on whether or not animals should have selfie rights. It's hitting all different types of standards along the way. I think about in English language arts, projects like Genius Hour or book pitches to convert a book into a movie, right? So they're doing independent reading or lit circle reading, and they create a pitch to movie execs about whether or not this book should be converted into a movie. You think about social studies projects, service learning project, historical documentary, those fun whiteboard videos, kind of like RSA Animate, all different types of things they could do. In math, some of the favorite things that our students are doing are creating scratch games. In geometry, creating an eco-friendly home. For homework, doing tutorial videos demonstrating mastery, creating board games. In science, Mythbuster projects are some of the favorite ones that we have going on right now. Some of our science classes have had students find cultural myths in their own background, in their own families, and bringing those myths and seeing whether or not they are backed by science. Other subjects it can happen as well, whether you're designing your own sport or doing design-oriented tutorial partnerships or creating a product and mock entrepreneurial teams. There's lots of different ways to do project-based learning in a variety of subjects. So after you choose what they're going to make or create or design, then we move to step 4. And this is, how can you scaffold and structure the experience, right? How can we plan a structure for learning and choose a consistent process? Normally, when we talk about project-based learning, the big problem is that the groups don't work. The groups, it's such a problem to work with students, and our group projects look like this, right? There's one person that does all the work, and you've probably seen this in grad school as well. I have no idea what's going on. Somebody says they're going to help, but they never help. Really, our role in project-based learning as a teacher is to be this guide on the side, right? Is to have students, have groups be this character with a problem that meets a guide, us, who consistently gives them a plan and calls them to action. Our job is just like Obi-Wan or Yoda or Miss Frizzle or Gandalf or Dumbledore, and our job is to give them a plan and call them to action. Our students are not always going to follow the plan, not always listen to the action, and we're going to have to continue to reiterate it over and over, but that is our goal. Some of the ways we can scaffold this student ownership are by getting students to do the talking, to own the discussion before they start project-based learning. One of our favorite ways to do this is through the discussion game. The discussion game works in any subject, in any grade level. Students come into class, and whether you're discussing a short story, or you're discussing something from history, or a science lab, or concept, or a math concept, or a word problem, The discussion game starts like this. They have an envelope on their desk or at their table, and it's filled with a pink card, a green card, a blue and yellow card, and a red card. And they play the cards as a discussion. As the teacher, I call on them. A kid raises a red card. They get to ask a question. Now, 4 other kids raise their cards. I call on those kids. They share what they think, what they feel, and eventually what they know. The blue and yellow card are worth a little bit more because the I know has to be backed up by references or evidence, right? I know this because, I know this, and you back it up with evidence. And so it models what good discussion looks like, right? After we start playing the discussion game, we move to the fishbowl. Now you have 25 students on the outside, 4 or 5 students on the inside, and the inside students are having discussion without the discussion game cards. They're talking while the students on the outside are doing one of 2 things. They could either be coaches for students on the inside and have halftime where we bring them back and give them some ideas, or they can be taking notes and coming up with questions to ask them. These types of scaffolding activities get students ready for project-based learning. Then, as a teacher, as a school, you got to choose a structure and stick with it. And it doesn't really matter what structure you choose. You could choose the scientific method. You could choose IDEO's design phases, which look like this. You could choose Stanford D School's design thinking process. You could choose the inquiry cycle, the inquiry process. You could choose the launch cycle, which John and I developed for K through 12 students. It doesn't really matter which you choose. You just got to stick with it, because it's too much for students to jump from one process to one process to one process. When they understand the process and they've used it a couple of times, now you can begin to plan check-ins and benchmarks and schedule conferences. And conferences are a huge part of project-based learning. We have all our students create action plans. It's going to look different if they're a K1-2 student, but basically the goal was for them to backwards plan. What are they going to create, and what are the steps that they need working backwards to create something? So if there's step 6 is the kids are going to create a Scratch video game, what is step 5, step 4, step 3, step 2, step 1? What's the timeline look like? What resources do they need? What potential barriers, concerns do they have? When they create this action plan, then we're able to conference, because we could go up to the group, or we can go up to the individual or the partnership, and we start having these types of conferences. The first type of conference is the feedback conference, okay? And this feedback conference is so important because it's at the beginning of a project. Students are asking questions, and me as the teacher are answering questions. As students move through the project in the middle towards the end, now we move to a reflection conference. And now the teacher asks questions, much like a quiz, and the students answer questions. We eventually want to get to that mastery conference, right? Because that mastery conference has a back and forth of asking and answering questions. And so if you look at that chart right there of what these conferences look like, there's a lot of options that you can do when you're working with students. Step 5 is, when will students self-assess? When will they revise and reflect? You know, in project-based learning, we have to assess the learning and the process as much as we assess the final product. We can't just assess the final product. Learning is this iterative process. So one of the things that we use all the time is this peer feedback form, okay? This peer feedback form is 10 minutes, and it's very explicit. You know as well as I do that most of the time you do peer feedback, there's kids that are saying stuff like, hey, good job, great job. And you're like, no, you have to be constructive, give some constructive criticism. And they're like, maybe you should change the color. Because feedback is hard. But in this peer feedback form that we give, there's specific directions for partner A and specific directions for partner B. Then we send this home with families. Lee, they are could be either, right? They can be individual conferences or group conferences, depending on the age level of kids and what they're working on and how much time you have. This peer feedback is great, though, because we send this home with families, and we ask kids to do this with a family member. And so first the family member asks them questions and learns about what the kid is working on in school. But then the kid asks the family member right? They switch partner A and partner B. Ask the family member what they're working on in their job or in their role of what they're doing. I can't tell you how many emails and phone calls we get from family members that are saying stuff like, my kid never knew what I really do at work. And in those 10 minutes of that peer feedback, they got to learn what I'm working on my project right now. It's such a great way to bring family in with this peer feedback form, and it gets the kids excited by being the ones to kind of know what they're doing. Another excellent way to assess the process is using something called the GRIT rubric. The GRIT rubric is a rubric that assesses the learning process, not the final product. G stands for guts, R for resiliency, I for integrity, T for tenacity. And it's a self-assessment. We have students self-assess whether or not they're exceeding expectations, meeting expectations, or below expectations. It's a great way to eliminate that group work problem. And it's a great way to have conversations and conferences with students about what they're thinking that they're doing, right? The project checklist is another thing. Now, especially if I'm with younger grades, we're hitting a checklist of what that looks like, right? We're hitting that checklist. And I think sometimes you can make the checklist deep, but other times you can make it just very specific. You can use rubrics like this measurement rubric or use standards-based rubrics as well, completely connecting to what you're doing with the standards. So whether your school or classroom is getting started with PBL or if you're taking it to the next level, I want you to think about what the options are for doing this. I talk a lot about this paradigm shift, that when I first got into teaching and education, every teacher I worked with thought their job was to prepare kids for something. And now, after my years in the classroom, my years as an instructional coach, and my years as an administrator and a university professor, I'm realizing more and more we don't know exactly what we're preparing students for. And so our job is to help kids learn to prepare themselves for anything. How can we put students in experiences where they can learn to prepare themselves for anything? As teachers, they have a huge impact on student lives. And yet, if you're a school leader, you hear these three questions all the time. Teachers want to do project-based learning. They literally want to do project-based learning. They're afraid to. They have huge reservations. They don't know about the time. The first one that we always get is, what about the time constraints, right? What are the time constraints? They're worried about planning project-based learning. Teachers are worried about getting through project-based learning. They don't know how long a project should take. What about the curriculum map? You know, we have this curriculum. We have this scope and sequence. The state's saying we have these standards. You know, I work in Pennsylvania. All our teachers have PVOS here. That's basically an acronym that says each teacher gets a color next to their name that shows how well they teach, or at least what the state thinks. And ultimately, what about the test? It's so interesting. You know, I work at Centennial School District, and one of the crazy things that happened this past year is that our middle school math scores on our Pennsylvania state assessment rose by 31%. Let me say that again. Our middle school math scores rose by 31%. Do you think that happened because we were teaching to the test? It did not. There are many, many schools and districts who think that they're going to get better by teaching to the test, and then it doesn't work. Or maybe it works marginally. And yet there is all this research out there on project-based learning. You can find it there at ajjuliana.com/research. And it indicates that project-based learning can lead to improved academic outcomes across K through 12. And yet we still have those reservations. Part of those reservations come from the question that our teachers and school leaders, us, ask all the time, which is, how do we know it's going to be better? How do we know it's going to be worth the time? And we have this notion in schools that we have to create everything from scratch. It's actually kind of crazy. If a doctor finds a new and better way to do open heart surgery, and they have proof that it works, then every other doctor jumps on board and is happy that there's a new way to do it that has improved outcomes. In education, we don't have some type of database where we have what are the best practices of what this look like. And so that in each school district, we are creating things on our own from scratch. And teachers feel like they have to make things from scratch. It's why Teachers Pay Teachers is so huge, because the market of teachers that are scared to create things on their own is enormous and growing every single day. If you look, I love using this chef analogy, because if you look at what chefs just don't start off being a chef. Everybody starts off cooking as a by-the-book cook. You follow a recipe, you hope that it works, you try it again, and eventually once you get good at recipes, you become a cook with your own unique style. You're throwing some different things in, changing some different things up, and eventually you become a cook with innovations, where you're making things and you're remixing things and you're trying things on your own, and only then do you become a chef where you're creating your own recipes. For some reason in education, we think everybody has to be a chef right out of college, when really teachers follow the same process as well. We're a by-the-book cook. We're following textbooks and lesson plans from other people and hoping that it works. And then we start with our own unique teaching style. And then we start innovating on what we're doing. And eventually we become that chef, but it takes a long time. I thought that I had to start from scratch with project-based learning, and it was so hard. And then I found a project, right? I found a project called the Flat Classroom Project. And it was amazing because Vicki Davis and Julie Lindsay had created this project, and they had been doing project-based learning much longer than I had done. And I learned so much as our students collaborated with each other, and they did amazing things, and they created videos, and they collaborated with kids from all over the world on Wikispaces years ago. But I didn't create the project. I jumped into the project. And I became a better teacher because I did not create it from scratch. What if you could start with projects that were fully developed? What if you could start with PBL experiences that were standards driven, that include voice and choice, that have authentic audiences, that are fully developed, but customizable? I don't even know if customizable is a word, right? But you can change them up. For a long time, I was looking for this as a school leader. And until recently, I didn't even know that something like this existed. A couple months ago, I partnered with Next Lesson to do just that, to provide teachers with PBL experiences that are standards driven, that include voice and choice, that have authentic audiences, that are fully developed, but also customizable.
Hey, I want you to head over to ajjuliani.com/virtual, and that's where you're going to get all these free resources. So we partner with Next Lesson. We've got some Summit Learning resources, and I don't want you to have to start from scratch. And so as we end this presentation, I just want to say that if you head over there, you can get started right away with resources that I know have worked for other teachers, and I know can work for you as well. Thanks for hanging out with me, and jump into PBL.
Thank you for joining this session. To request a certificate of attendance, you can access the link at the bottom of the session description, scan the QR code here, or go to bit.ly/I2 certificate. Bit.ly shorteners are case sensitive, so please be sure to use all uppercase letters. Hear what insight other I2 attendees and presenters might have on this session and other breakout sessions by connecting with the Innovation Institute community on Facebook or Twitter at I2 Estale or in Attendify's interactive features. And don't forget to mark your calendar for June 8th and 9th to join us for I2 2022. Thank you.